I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then if folks come in, then that's fantastic. But since we're an intimate group, what I thought we could do to start out is maybe we'll all introduce ourselves, and then when it comes back around to the panelists, they can begin by saying, you know, what courses they teach that have a community engaged component, roughly how long you've been teaching them, and then we'll have plenty of kind of pauses between the questions that I have prepared, and then you know, you can ask your own questions and so forth. So we'll have it be a little more conversational, but I have more preloaded questions, I suppose. So I'll go first. I'm Michelle Decker. I am in English at Scripps, and I'm also a faculty co-director for the CTL.
Hi everyone, I'm Sadie Audi. I'm the Organic Chemistry Lab Coordinator at the Keck Science Department and one of the faculty co-directors of the CTL.
Hey, I'm Corey Davia. I teach philosophy at CMC, and I also run summer programming for the Gould Center.
I'm Jason Torr. I'm in Keck Sciences, and I'm the lab coordinator for integrated biology and chemistry.
I'm Emily Wiley. I'm a faculty member at Keck Science, teach biology.
Hi, I'm Tessa. I'm also at Keck Science. I teach in neuroscience.
I'm Sharda Umanath. I'm in psychological science at CMC. And so as a panelist, I've been teaching a community-related course for all of, what week is this? Week 4? So I'm new at this. Initially, I just wanted to come and listen, but hey, I can tell you what I've learned so far. But I teach a class, a brand new class called Effective Learning Across the Lifespan. And so I have 5 elder co-learners from Pilgrim Place and from Mount San Antonio Gardens who are like full participants in the class with 9 undergraduates from across the 5 Cs. Yeah.
So hi, I'm Katie Purvis Roberts. I'm at Keck Science in chemistry and environmental science as well. And so I have 2 different community-based projects and 2 different classes. So one of them is actually in collaboration with Jason. And so we've had I teach Advanced Lab, which is kind of instrumentation and analytical chemistry for my students. And I started off actually having a very small component of the class be community-based, where we go to different farms. We started off actually at the Pitzer farm, sampling the soil and seeing if there's heavy metals in the soil. And we kind of have progressed to community gardens. And then last year, Jason came on board and said, yeah, I really want to do a collaborative project with Advanced Lab. He was teaching our integrated biology and chemistry intro class. And so I don't even know how we did it, but we've developed this project on looking at water quality in Adelanto up in the high desert. And I only did 1 laboratory experience with this, but Jason had the whole entire semester, had developed these labs to do different water quality tests about the water. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're going to make some changes this year. And then I also teach environmental chemistry, which I just came from now. And in that class, we're actually doing a community-based project in Bangkok, Thailand, in collaboration with one of my colleagues over there, looking at water and air quality around the Bangkok canals and kind of redevelopment for better transportation options in the city. So, yeah.
Jason, do you want to sit up on
I feel like
There is an open
there's
chair.
right there for you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Karl Haushaulter. I'm a biochemist at Harvey Mudd College, and I've taught for a number of years a class on the HIV/AIDS epidemic from both a science and societal perspective. Started teaching that course in 2008, and I've done it 8 or 10 times since then. And over the years, it's evolved, and the community-based component has had different forms. We've had partnerships with local groups such as Fiddle AIDS Project and Crossroads, and also Pilgrim Place and the Napier Initiative. And the most recent version of the course was taught as an inside-out course, and so we actually went out to the CRC prison and had a mixed class of inside students and outside students from the consortium.
I'm Sue Castagnetto. I am based at Scripps. I direct the Intercollegiate Feminist Center for Teaching, Research, and Engagement. And I teach courses at Scripps and Pomona in philosophy and gender and women's studies. Do you want me to talk now about those courses? or-
You could just talk a little bit about the
Okay,
community-based
okay.
component in each
So-
course. Yeah, sure.
I've actually taught a range or I've taught courses with a range of community engagement components. Primarily, I have taken students over to the local women's prison to write with women inside, which is really fun. I can talk more about that. I've also partnered with community organizations to develop in-class projects for students to do. And I have been part of the Napier Initiative, which itself is a community engagement project. It's easy, relatively easy to teach a class as a Napier class, and we'll talk more about that. 3 of us have done that. And I also helped someone else develop a community-based project, which is kind of an interesting model that I can talk about. So.
Hi, I'm Heidi Haddad. I'm in politics and international relations at Pomona. This spring will be my 3rd iteration of a community-based class. I've taught it 2 springs before. It's in partnership with the Department of International Affairs at the Mayor's Office of the City of Los Angeles, and like a newly formed organization where the directorate is based in the Mayor's Office of Change. It's called City Hub and Network for Gender Equity. So it's 7 global cities that are working on gender equity together: LA, London, Barcelona, Freetown, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, and Mexico City. And basically we do research for them. So I have a small class and they give us a research project at the beginning of the class that they need in order to sort of move their initiatives along, and they don't have the capacity to do, and we meet with them every 2 weeks, working together as a team to do this research for them, and it ends with an executive summary and like a 75-page report that, on what they need, and that could be sort of a landscape analysis, it could be case studies, policy recommendations.
So one of the reasons I was so excited about this panel is because we obviously have a representation of levels of experience, kinds of classes, different kinds of partnerships. And so I think one of the things that, speaking for myself, I have just started teaching a community-based class 3 years ago, and I think one of the most daunting things for folks as they're considering doing this kind of work is, how do you begin? So I wondered if the panelists could talk a little bit about like how you started. Katie, you mentioned a little bit about like, okay, I just did a project, so did you find a partner first? Did you have an idea for a project or an assignment, for instance, and then it kind of morphed? So I wonder if folks could talk about that. Yeah.
I just wondered if we could start maybe even just one
Sure,
step
please.
higher, broader. So I'm hearing some of you say community engagement projects and some of you saying community-based. Are these the same kinds of things, or are there differences in how you categorize, and what would those differences be? That would just be really helpful as I listen to your projects.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody think of them as different or have any distinction that they want to make?
I definitely have no idea.
Yeah.
I remember, Carl, I think I was listening to you once, and you talked about kind of criteria, like a true, maybe, I don't know if it was community-based or community engagement, but you involve the community partners in the study, or, they have a really active role. So they're not just saying, I want this done, but they have a really active role in the project.
Sure, but I can just comment a little bit. Like I'm not actually sure about the vocabulary and like the distinctions. There may very well be within the community so scholarship distinctions made.
Okay.
I use the terms relatively interchangeably.
Okay.
But to your question, to the point, as my class has evolved, I definitely have tried to engage with the partners in a partnership way, where they are really helping to develop the project together, and so that they are, we are making something really cool together, instead of just me kind of going out to them and like, and this is what we're going to do, and so that's great. So I think just as a philosophy, I've tried to become a better and better partner and a better and better listener to what they need.
Thanks.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, I'm in no ways an expert on this either in terms of like the scholarship and the actual definitions, but I think that, I've seen the terms used more or less interchangeably, but I think that the kind of general ethos or the kind of, hope in most community engaged or community-based projects is that there is like a partnership rather than a kind of one unidirectional, power or power flow between like the colleges and their community partners.
Yeah.
Is that at all usefully illustrated?
It is, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question. Does anybody else have something that's come up for them already that they want to ask for? Before we go into like how did you maybe more practically begin your thinking or your process? Great, cool. Would anybody be willing to talk about their origin story?
I mean, mine is very recent, so all of
Yes.
you can think about it longer. So I do research in memory and healthy aging. So this is my 8th year at CMC. So immediately upon getting here, I started talking to and figuring out like what are the pockets of older adults in the community who can then participate in my research. And so in doing that, started to get to know Pilgrim Place in particular. And I'm good friends with our like director of fellowships who does work with the Napier Initiative on the student side, the Napier Fellowship. And kind of through that also discovered, oh, they have a class-related thing where more robustly than just the call program, which is older adult auditors in your classes that you can allow, that there's kind of an expectation that these elder co-learners will be full participants in your class. And so in the back of my mind, this was something already that I thought could be really interesting and cool given my own research. And so then in applying for a National Science Foundation career grant, part of the grant is coming up with teaching initiatives, and Emily stepped out, but Emily looked at this for me because she won one. And so one of the teaching initiatives that I thought would be perfect would be to develop a course through the Napier Initiative purposefully with the idea that elders would be in the class from the get-go. And so, you know, one thing that I've always wanted to do was kind of an effective learning class, and thinking about that across the lifespan, getting our very when is the next exam students to think more broadly about, you know, learning across their whole lives, and also having elders in the room who are very curious about, well, what is going on with my memory and how is it working? So I proposed that as part of the grant. I got the grant somehow. So then I was like, okay, I have to actually execute. And so one of the, and I can talk about this more later, but one of the more challenging pieces of it for me was trying to figure out then how to fully integrate these two very disparate groups in my classroom in terms of my expectation for the older adults, in terms of what I'm expecting everyone to read. Typically in an upper level psych class, you know, it's a research proposal. That's what the major assignment is at the end of the semester. Come up with an experiment. Well, you know, that may or may not work so well with elder co-learners. Like, how do I adjust to this? And so to me, the main community engagement part of the class is not only that they're participants in the class, but that I tried to come up with a final assignment that is, you know, pairs of undergrads with elder co-learner working on some idea based in research to improve some aspect of everyday life in that elder's life or their friends and community that they're then going to go test. And so hopefully it will end up being a partnership, but building that assignment was really hard for me, which is why I wanted to come to this, to see, well, how do you all scaffold that kind of big project where, you know, I know how to do it for a research proposal, but something like this, I was like, I guess I'm just gonna try it and we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so that's how I got to this.
Yeah, I can. So I'll focus on the general chemistry advanced lab kind of collaboration, since Jason's here and he can add to it too. Sorry to put you on the spot. But yeah, in advanced lab, yeah, there's certain different instrumentation and techniques that we have to cover so that they can go out and get a job after they graduate. And so when I took over the lab, we were basically just taking soil samples from Harvey Mudd's campus, down into the center of campus and comparing how much lead there was in soil, because there's a lot of historic lead on Route 66. And that was kind of fun for a couple of years, but I was like, this is really, like, if I have to do this for the next 40 years, I'm going to be kind of bored. And so I started talking to the students in the Pitzer garden, who are in charge of that. And they're like, we never really tested the soil before, so could you come and test our soil? And so we started doing that a little bit, but the garden's pretty small. So then we just, we're talking to people at Pitzer who are involved in the wider sustainable agriculture community. And they actually have a garden down in Ontario and then another one in Harupa Valley. And so we started going out to those gardens. And that was really great because the people would come who were using these community gardens and talk to the students and kind of explain the ethos behind it. So the students actually could go and volunteer, and some of them did at those gardens. And then once we did the analysis, we'd go back and share the results and what we found with them. And so it was kind of a nice, small project. It wasn't like a huge project throughout the whole entire semester. And that was always really interesting. But when Jason came last year, he's like, it would be really fun if we could collaborate and the freshmen could do something with the juniors and seniors, and we could have mentorship go on between the two classes. And so that's when we started kind of coming up with these ideas. And I don't even remember how we settled on this.
Well, it sort of started with desire to do something.
Yeah.
And not sure what, and a lot of brainstorming. And then I reached out to Tricia Morgan at Pitzer, and I forget what that office is called.
Like Community Engagement Center.
Community Engagement Office.
Yeah.
She had a few ideas about projects, people that she'd been in contact with, and so I met with Tricia and we talked through a few ideas, and one really percolated up and seemed like it would be really good for our class. At least it was something that I could visualize doing with first year students in IBC that would work for our collaboration. And so we just kind of pursued it in that direction. So asking for help really paid off in this case, and asking around. I was brand new last year, I knew nobody. I think making the connection that we ultimately ended up making, which was most directly with a city council member up in Adelanto, who was very concerned about the quality of the water in her community. She was a very passionate city council member and was willing to talk with our students and really engage very directly with us, help coordinate water sampling. That was really wonderful because it took on sort of a life of its own. It took on she brought a lot of energy and enthusiasm to the project, and we were able to connect students with her. She would visit our classes through Zoom, so it gave the students a real sense of purpose right away. We can teach them how to use a barrette, but they're doing this technique with this in mind that the water quality in this community may not be up to par. It just took on a sense of urgency and a sense of importance in their work, and I think the students really ran with that and took it very serious.
Yeah. And we're hoping to interact with the school this next time. I need to send that email, but and connect with the middle school up there and have the students kind of help us with the water sampling and testing and things. But I mean, there's definitely things we want to change and do better, but it was fun the first year.
It was a lot.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, very, very cool. I wish I could take that lab class.
Yeah,
It sounds more.
We need TAs.
So my origin story started at a gathering like this that Daryl Young, the founding director of the CTL, led like years and years ago, before there was a CTL, just this was a Harvey Mudd event. And he was talking about his community engagement work that he had done. It's like, oh, this sounds amazing. And so it kind of planted a seed that a few years later bore fruit with the class on HIV and AIDS. And but that class started like kind of gradually morphing into it. And I had a connection to Foothill AIDS Project, which is a local group, an AIDS service organization. And I, through that connection, was able to have them come and give a guest lecture, and there's so many people who would be panelists, and I also went and gave lectures for them and did staff trainings for them. And so I started with this personal connection I had with the agency, just doing a little bit of a few one-off things during the semester that then gradually grew into the students doing projects and doing like mini internships with FAP. I then got connected with the Napier Initiative just through serendipity. My across the street neighbor was Jerry Irish, who was really one of the early people who got the Napier Initiative off the ground, and he kind of harassed me into getting involved with this. Hey, you really should do this, and so I did. And then through that, I ran a Napier class, and then one of my elder co-learners had been doing a lot of volunteer work with Crossroads, which then became a community partner for us in a future year. So it kind of just snowballed in that way. And then some more fellow Napier Initiative colleagues twisted my arm into taking the Inside Out training, which I then learned about that program, and then have most recently taught the class in that way. So it's been just a lot of like Claremont connections through gatherings like this have opened doors for me to make help the class expand and grow.
Well, I've, as I said, taught a variety of formats of community engagement. The most common one is taking students over to the California Institution for Women, local state women's prison, to participate in a writing group with women inside, which is a really fantastic experience. And sometimes I've invited expert writers. You should come sometime if we ever do it again.
Sure.
Creative writers to lead, to facilitate a little workshop, which has been really wonderful. I got started with that actually through, I was interested in issues of crime and punishment and responsibility and free will. And we organized a conference in 2000 called Women, Prisons, and Criminal Injustice, and invited a lot of people from community organizations to come. And through that, I started getting involved in one of them, going to the meetings, and then we started having meetings out in Claremont. We developed a Claremont chapter. And one of the things that group did was to invite community members into the prison to have conversations with women inside around the issues they were facing. And then we had this idea of taking students to meet young women inside, and eventually that morphed into going over regularly with students, which morphed into attaching that experience to this writing group and to a class for various reasons, which I can go into if you're interested. But so for the last, 12, 15 years, Erin Runnins and I have been alternating classes. She's not going to be, I don't know if we're even going to be doing this anymore, but we attached attendance at 6 writing workshops to a class that has a prison criminal justice theme to it. And I've done it with different classes, actually. It started with a class called Gender, Crime, and Punishment that I teach at Pomona in the spring. And I actually started teaching that class after the conference, and those students started going over, but pre-writing group. But anyway, there's that. I've also done community engagement classes where students have worked on specific projects for community organizations. One was Crossroads, which I got to know Crossroads through that conference. And they did different projects like creating a website and creating informational handouts and things like that. That was through the relationship I already had with Crossroads. I met a woman who was starting up a support group for women who have loved ones inside, and she needed a lot of help getting that off the ground. So we developed projects in another class for students to do that had mixed success. And in the Napier classes, I happened to have made connections with Pilgrim Place, and then David Mann, who's the head honcho kind of Napier classes. I mean, he's always trying to recruit faculty to teach them. Said, hey, we need a Napier class. Do you want to teach a class? And I started teaching, actually a couple of classes I'm teaching on this semester with elder co-learners. And we've done different kinds of projects. As simple as interviewing people at Pilgrim Place who've done work related to the theme of the class over the course of their lives, which is really fun. I also, just quickly, one year I was the faculty coordinator at Pomona College's Draper Center for Community Partnerships. So that's the name of it exactly. And I helped Rick Worthington, who's now retired, I think, but was teaching a class called Politics of Environmental Justice and wanted to have a project with a community organization. So I did some research and found a community organization that might work and contacted them, and we developed a policy project for students to do that they needed doing that involved researching ballot initiatives related to the work of the organization. And that didn't require them going off campus, which is a plus in some ways. And there was a nice partnership there. So those are some different examples of things I've done, and I'm happy to talk about. But I would say the conference, if you're interested in a theme, conference, speaker, symposium, if you could organize that and invite people you think you might like to work with, that's a really good stepping stone to developing a relationship with that.
That's a great idea. So in terms of my course, it really sort of came out from research connections I had. So my own research had moved in the directions of global cities, and global cities sort of localizing international norms, particularly around human rights and sustainable development. And so I was sort of invited to a conference that where we were presenting sort of human rights futures, and I was talking about cities at that conference, and sort of serendipitously at that conference, there were people from the mayor's office there who were also talking about their UN Sustainable Development work, and they're sort of trying to localize that at the city level, and so I was connected with them at that time. The mayor's office at that time was just really trying to launch this LA SDG initiative, and they needed capacity, they needed research, they needed bodies, and so at that time they were really trying to get student interns. And so the first iteration of this was actually internships, and they really wanted to have it be LA-ish, even though we're sort of on the outskirts for LA County, but we won't make it count. So it was with USC, UCLA, Occidental, and then I was at this conference, so it was I got to connect with them, and so at that time they were working on having slots of students from each of the schools with different majors to work on these internships on their SDG work over the summer. And so the first aspect of it was just sending 2 Pomona students to do it for a summer, right? And so they interned with the mayor's office, and then they realized that that really wasn't the model that they wanted to do for the mayor's office. It was just too much work for them. They had faculty overseeing these internships. I was not one of them, but they needed more oversight, they needed more direction, and it was too much work for the people in the mayor's office. And so that's when they sort of moved to this, they call it the task force model. And so then they, these academic partners they had from the internship, they were like, are you interested in teaching classes? So Occidental, I think it's been they've taught more of these classes than anyone, I think. I think they're on the 9th class or something like that, and there's multiple faculty who teach it. But because of this sort of relationship, I was like, oh, I'll teach a class. And so that's how the task force sort of happened at Pomona. And then the relationships have sort of been sustained. We haven't really been able to institutionalize it in any real sense. We're sort of hoping to, but it's sort of been just this personal, people there, and you're figuring it out. But in terms of the models, which we'll get to, it was really helpful to get a syllabus from Occidental before I taught the class. That was absolutely instrumental in terms of how do you even think about running this class? How do you even structure it? What kind of language can you talk about? So it was, it's distinct, and I think it's sort of become my own over this last iteration and now the 3rd iteration, but having just some sort of scaffolding to it was, I don't know if I could have done it otherwise. I couldn't have even imagined what that would all look like. So, stop there.
Yeah, because it's such a different kind of teaching than for, again, I'll speak for myself. So the different panelists have said, I think we have models of people kind of organically building out to a full community-based class versus just community-based projects. But for me, I'm a humanist, and I just was I want to teach something that's community-based. And we had the Scripps initiative, the Mellon initiative, and so I was they're okay, you can design a class, but I was how in the world do you go about doing this? What kind of training, what kind of support, how do you begin? So with that in mind, I wonder if you all could talk a little bit about whether there is a kind of advice or tools that you use that you think are especially helpful, ways that, things that you wish that you had known. So, have you received any support that was especially useful for yourself? Or maybe even Sharda, aspirationally, what would you really like to have? So, we don't have to start with Sharda, but since we're going down the line, but anybody who wants to take on this question of, recognizing that this is a different kind of teaching, we're not really even in graduate school taught how to teach, but this seems like an entirely different kind of teaching from what is expected in the classroom. So, what has been a useful way of thinking about that sort of teaching, or what do you have questions about how to kind of think about this as a pedagogical style? Like, would you, I guess another way of saying it is like, would you recommend starting small with a project and then working out? I mean, so you mentioned like, if you have a dream or a theme, like maybe start with a conference and then bring in partners that way. Would you recommend doing something that is, as silly as I did it, like just go for it, go full tilt, and then figure it out as you go along? Because you might never get to the full thing if you don't just like plunge in.
I sort of feel that way because, prior to this class, the way David Mann, who is the champion of the Napier Initiative classes, was like, oh, you can just Napierize, made a verb, right? Napierize any class, right? Like, we just want, elder co-learners in your room, like whichever class you want to do that for. And for me, I felt like that would be way harder than building a class that was meant to have elder co-learners in it, because taking my other classes, which already have sort of a typical academic structure, I was like, I don't know how I would change it just enough to make it suitable to have community members, right, in the course. Whereas for me, it was much easier to be like, okay, no, from the get-go, I need X number of elders in the class so they can pair with X number of students all through the class. Like, let's start from there. And then it also changed, I think you asked this in one of the pre-questions, it totally changed what I assigned as reading, right? Because I normally, in an upper level class, like many of you, am fully assigning journal articles, right? That's all the students are reading. And in this, I was like, I can't ask, 6 elder co-learners to be reading journal article, like 3 or 4 journal articles for every class. That's not realistic. And so it meant that I spent, a few months reading every pop psych book on human learning and memory, some of which were pretty garbage and some of which are really interesting, to find stuff that I felt like, okay, this is hitting the right level that would be challenging and interesting, and maybe 1 journal article every couple of classes, so that, we can actually have discussions all together and nobody feels totally overwhelmed by just the reading alone. But for me, I definitely felt more comfortable with let's just go all in and then we're just gonna see how it goes, because I don't think I felt like I could just tweak my class to make it fit, for this at least.
I could speak to Napierizing. I did the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe my classes are more suited to, we're not just reading 4 journal articles,
right,
which would seem to me in philosophy stultifying. Sorry, no. 4 journal articles. 1 could be daunting, but my classes read a range of things, interdisciplinary, and a range of scholars, popular media, different things. But also, I would say Napierizing isn't really very hard to do, because even if you had just 4 journal articles, it might not be so interesting to the elder co-learners, but they are brilliant. They read everything very carefully.
Yep.
I find I assign, among other writings, blog posts. They write way more. They read what everyone writes. They write really, really thoughtful, deep comments. So it's not hard to have Napier elder co-learners in your classes.
Not in that way. I would say definitely doesn't change the level of intellectual engagement at all. If anything, it rises.
And it can also, this has been not possible since COVID, but they're just built-in possibilities for community engagement. Like we would go over for lunch a couple of times a semester and just have conversations with the amazing people over at Pilgrim Place, as well as doing things like the interview project. And many of them they're community organizers and have been involved in community organizations in all kinds of ways, and they are ideally, I mean, this is how the first Napier class got started with Jerry Irish, right? They are, if you wanted to, able to help develop community projects for the students. Mm-hmm. And also I think just having these elder co-learners, the intergenerational classroom, gives a sense that the classroom isn't just this single age, isolated to the Claremont College's space. It really makes it feel like the classroom is more part of the community, and students love it, and they're somehow less woke, I think, sometimes. Elder co-learners in the space, who are also willing to ask questions that some students wouldn't be willing to ask. So it's a really nice model, I think, and not hard to do. And you can go to napierinitiative.org and read all about what a Napier class is and see what the offerings are now and next semester. So, and I'm happy to share materials if anyone's interested.
Can I ask a question about them? Do they include science classes, or because I've opened up my chemistry classes to call, the call program, and I've never had anyone sign up.
This is a little different, right?
Yeah.
So usually with the Napier Initiative, it's only like 2 or 3 classes, and the difference is that they're kind of walking in expecting to be held accountable as a full participant in the class.
Right.
They don't really, hopefully, want to be sitting just listening. And so I think that's a big difference with being kind of under the Napier Initiative umbrella. And typically that means that, there's a whole application process, and they write you an essay about why they want to be in your class, and what their prior experiences are and things like that. So I think it's definitely a more robust structure than the call program. For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and they have, advanced degrees, and they're, and Carl could speak to teaching a science-based class as a major class.
Yeah, and so the way that class was structured is that there was a science and kind of a society component, and the Napier students, the elder co-learners, were full participants in the society discussions, kind of interdisciplinary readings we had, and then on the science side, they were maybe more spectators to that.
Okay.
But, and we occasionally you get someone who had been a practicing nurse, or had some medical training or something there, or maybe a master's degree in something somewhat tangential where they could chime in a bit more. But they definitely were more active in the society part and the science, which made me be a little bit less so.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Just FYI, Meg Mathias, who taught at Keck, was in my class last semester.
Oh, she was.
She was fantastic.
Yeah.
I would have liked her to talk even more than she did, but sometimes anyway. It's neither here nor there.
But in terms of just thinking about when started class, some of the resources that have helped me. There's a really nice book called Essentials of Service Learning that Barbara Jacoby from Campus Compact wrote years ago, and I use that as a reference. Service learning as a term has evolved over the years in terms of how we use that. I think a lot of people prefer community-based learning or something like that, but the book is really good and has lots of good advice. At Harvey Mudd, we have an Office of Civic and Community Engagement and a really outstanding staff director, Gabrielle Gamiz, and so she's been a really great partner and a resource, and so much like the Draper Center at Pomona, and I'm sure the other schools have equivalent places, so getting that staff expertise and help has been great. So Gabriella, one of the things that she'll do with my students is come to my class and give them a little bit of a talking to about what it means to go out in the community and how to behave is not quite the right word, but just how to be respectful, how to be cognizant of your privilege and your biases, and so when you go into a space that you're not doing more harm than good, and she can speak to the students very directly about this, and so that's very, very helpful, and so definitely using that Office of Community Engagement, whatever that looks like at your home institution, I'd say is a big help. The Inside Out program, which I've been involved with, is really nice because it has a built-in structure. You you don't have to, a lot of it you don't have to invent from scratch because you're kind of like plugged into a template and you just do. And then so and there's a big, huge training you go through. You know, you're going through this with a cohort of instructors, and so it kind of has a built-in support system as you launch your courses. So that is another way to get involved into a defined program that has sort of a defined training that you do before you are able to teach an inside-out course.
I mean, I'll add just one additional thing. So the first time I taught the class, at the end of the class, there were some major challenges around like teamwork, right? So we had this class where we're all working on a shared project for the entirety of the semester, and most students had never done anything like that before, right? And they're engaging with sort of, high level, elected officials and staff, and also some of them didn't have the sort of skills to do that. And so a lot of that was trying to figure out like, how do we sort of build this in the next time? So there's a lot of sort of expectation building, but in terms of one strategy that I think has worked pretty well, we do a lot internally in the class, and I talked to them a lot about it, but I had 2 students from the very first class write something down for the next students, like best practices. So here's what you need to do. Here's some strategies for being successful in this kind of class. And then it's sort of on the Sakai page, we pass it out, we talk about it, but it's also like, it's not just coming from me, it's like this sort of, institutional memory coming from students in terms of best practices. So I think that the second iteration was much better. It was also not on Zoom, the whole thing. People were like all over the world trying to do this with time zones, but I think that's worked really nicely.
Yes, thank you.
So then, that just reminds me, one of my questions was, have any of you, well, it sounds like, so there's a project that's iterated year after year, right?
It's a distinct research project every semester that we do.
Has anyone had the kind of project that that has legs over time, so students are doing basically the same kinds of analyses year after year, and so you can use, I'm wondering if you've ever used students who have gone through it, first to then mentor the next cohort. So it's an additive study, you build on the previous year's work. Has anyone done anything like that? And I'm curious if you set up mentoring.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I had one student who was in the internship,
Yeah.
then she went into the class.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then for this spring, there was a student who was in the class 2 years ago who actually became a summer intern at Change this last summer. And then I specifically requested her to be in the class again.
Yeah.
I don't know if the curriculum committee will let her take the class twice. We have to sort of fight that battle. But yes, they're even asking for that sort of continuity across it. It just helps. I mean, then there's mentoring sort of within the class as well.
How does that work? You mean with this person, one person?
With this person, but I'm also so I don't know. I have a class where it's perm only, so I select students, and I try to select students that have different sort of skill sets, perspectives, right? One of those is having done policy work before, and so generally there's somebody who has done policy work. We had computer science, we have IR, we've had econ, we've had pre-health, we've got all sorts of people who've done gender work in other ways, right? So, but that sort of especially the people who've done policy work before are often seniors, and they often mentor, the other, oftentimes sophomores. There's very few sophomores, there's like 1 or 2, but they usually mentor them, sometimes the juniors, in terms of this is how you write policy work. This is it, but everyone sort of brings their own perspective. Language has been big also, right? So we did case studies across the world, and so we had Spanish speakers and we had a Portuguese speaker in the class.
Wow, that's cool.
So there's a little bit of that, but it's hard because I can ask the student to come back. I can't force it in her schedule, and it might not work in her schedule in that way. But the curriculum committee would be helpful by saying each class is distinct and you can take it twice, but we haven't gotten there yet.
I'm going to chime in here because I'm teaching the 3rd iteration of my community-based poetry class, and I'm working with the same partner. And one of the things that she emphasized was that it's the Dawes Center for the Arts in the city of Pomona. It's just a phenomenal space. They do workshops and they offer classes for students both in the Pomona Unified School District and at their facility, their center in downtown Pomona. But she emphasized that as wonderful as it is to have community-based classes, what they want most of all is continuity, right? They want to know that there's this resource, but it's going to be ongoing, which I respect. And so we offer workshops, creative writing workshops for 6 sessions throughout the semester. But what I've been trying to do is to offer students opportunities in the off semesters to do it for volunteer time. And so this is the first year where I've had returning students who took the course last semester and then volunteered in the spring to come in and mentor the current class. And sort of like you, Heidi, I had them write a curriculum. Like I was like, I don't know how to do any of this, so I'm gonna ask them to do it. And they did. So we had some students who had worked with like 826 LA, which is a creative writing program in the city of Los Angeles, or different kinds of, volunteer programs in their hometowns. And so they actually had way more experience teaching creative. I'm not a creative writer. I teach in critical stuff. So I like to write, but I've never taught like a creative writing workshop. So they were actually much more experts than I was. And so I think that it was a great act of trust, but also I was trusting their expertise in leading the way, which was kind of scary. But one of the questions I would like to ask the panel actually is about the level of work that this class presents, and whether you think it's worth it. Because for me, I find this very worthwhile work, but it is a different level of thinking. I'm thinking much more longitudinally about classes and relationships and partnerships than I do where usually I'm thinking about a semester. Like, okay, well, I've got these people for 3 months, but I actually am trying to think about this class as being something that can have durability and that has a legacy. So I wonder if anybody thinks about their classes in this way, and also about that kind of work and investment and how it feels to you.
Yeah. Well, it does take a lot more work for these kind of classes for sure, because there's all the prep work that you're doing. Like, we're starting to think about the class for next semester now to try to get it all set up. But it's totally worthwhile, because I think, just showing science students that they can use their science for good and to help people, I think is pretty awesome. So I think it's definitely worth the time and effort. And it's also, I think, great for me. It energizes me, because if I was teaching the same thing that I did when I came in 20 years ago, I'd be so bored. And this really opens it up. But it is, you don't have much control sometimes. Yes. And that's scary for me. I like to have everything, I keep on losing my pen, sorry. But I like to have things under control. I'm an analytical chemist, and that's kind of the name of the game for me. So to teach these classes is stressful for my personality, but worth it. Yeah, Emily did.
I'm with you there, Kate.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, I'd say twice as much work, maybe 2.5 times more work, 10 times the enjoyment and the fun.
Yeah.
But, a lot of this work I started when I was an associate professor. I was post-tenure. Am I going to be doing this same thing for all my career? Likewise, getting a little bit, not quite burnt out, but just sort of wondering, like, what can I do to keep it fresh? And this definitely reminded me of why I enjoy teaching. It does keep you on your toes, because it's so much more improvising, because a lot of them expected it happens. We'd have a community partnership with a local organization, and then our liaison left the organization just halfway through the semester, and then we have to completely rethink the project, and just so you do have to think on your feet a lot, and so it is definitely a lot more work, but it's very, very satisfying.
Yeah, the control aspect is very out the window. I don't know about all of you, but normally, my syllabus is fully, completely done before the first day of class, right? Every assignment, everything. I know when everything is due, and I know what I'm teaching, in November on a particular day in August. I know that, and so, I tried to do something similar with this class, and already I can tell, each day I have been over ambitious. Oh, I thought I would be able to get through X amount of material, because normally I can get through even more than that. I already cut back, but no, instead we had this really interesting discussion, because the elder co-learners had these personal experiences or life experiences that they could share that got us talking about, you know, something else, which didn't feel like a tangent, but also meant that I didn't, you know, cover what I expected to cover. Or, you know, an elder co-learner has shingles and can't come to class for 6 weeks. So now what do I do? Because they were going to be in this group and all of that stuff. So definitely it is an exercise for me in like letting go of my like, but I made this beautiful puzzle piece that fits together so perfectly. Like, now what do I do? But yeah, you know, on the flip side, as you said, we had a day, you know, where we covered theories of cognitive aging. So we're learning from the research side about like what is happening to you elders in the room right now. And the next class, I just said open discussion, like let's talk about this. And you know, they were in small groups, and I could kind of see like light bulbs going off across the class of the students and the elder co-learners like realizing like, oh, these are actually universals that happen across age. They're not things that are just happening, you know, in old age. These are things that I feel different about even since I was, you know, in middle school, and it was so cool. And you know, I had that feeling that I'm sure all of you have of like, wow, am I actually accidentally or purposefully creating a formative experience for these students? Like, did I do that? Is that happening right now? So I think, yeah, it is a lot of work, and you have to give up a lot of control, but really, really cool things can happen. Yeah.
I think it's worth pointing out, I mean, I think we've jumped in, right? I mean, we're all like deep into this. But whenever faculty ask me, I always, you know, if you're thinking about doing it, it is a lot of work if you jump all in
Yep.
to the deep side. But you can do this for a week or 2 or 3 weeks. You can do smaller levels of engagement with the community or different types of thing. I mean, it sounds like all of these are semester-long projects. They're really intense. But, you know, I always try to give the advice to people. It's like, yeah, if you're thinking about doing it, find something small and test that out first and see how you like it, see how it works, and experiment with it. And it's great to be able to experiment with classes year after year and maybe build up to this. And so I try not to frighten people with it's a lot of work, because it is a lot of work when you do it for a whole semester. But I think there are lots of different sort of flavors and sizes that are reasonable to start with, maybe.
Let's just one more thing. It's important to note too that your community partners don't operate on the same schedule that we do. I think that's like major, right? So we have this like put our, you know, our classes now for the spring, and right, and then you're trying to organize things, and they just have a completely different schedule. So you're kind of ongoing working with them, or you're working with them 6 months out that, you know, like where I'm like, yes, I will partner with you. I'm not going to hear about the project until January, and then I have to put together a syllabus, right, in the next 2 weeks. But and the relationships are ongoing too. It's not like I can be like, I'm not going to talk to you for 6 months and then, hey, let's do it, right? Like, you know, it's kind of a constant engagement with their own work and their needs, and sort of continually cultivating those relationships.
I mean, as I said, I had relationships certainly with Crossroads and with this other group that went over to the women's prison. Those already existed. So I was already participating in their work, and it was easy to talk to them about involving students in different ways. What were their needs, for example? And I think if an organization has a one-off need or a two-off need, you could address that with a class. And I really like the idea of bringing our resources to the service of community organizations. I mean, definitely two-way, definitely reciprocity involved, but we have amazing resources here, including our smart students who know how to do research. And a one-off project is definitely a possibility, even though you would presumably keep in contact with the organization, and maybe they have other one-off projects, but that's, you know, that's less daunting than some kinds of projects are.
Exactly, to Jason's point, right, which is like,
Starts.
it's a lot of work, but it's less work if you just start small, and then it can build into something where, you know, I think there's just definitely personality differences. I'm a jump in the deep end kind of person, and then I'm like,
oh, I'm really in here now.
Yeah.
But not everybody is like that, and I think to like be more moderate and recognize that there are existing tracks and existing relationships that the colleges have, the Napier Initiative being one of them, Inside Out being one of them, or just like, you know, the partners that are already well established, that if that you can contact those folks and see if there's something that is just a 1 class or 2 class or even, you know, half a semester. That's a good way to get started.
I mean, so when, I was going to say, when
I
did, when I worked with Rick Worthington on developing this project with Communities for Better Environment, which does really groundworking grassroots work in a variety of ways in LA and low-income neighborhoods. So we talked about, wouldn't it be great to have some kind of clinic like the Harvey Mudd Engineering Clinic program where community organizations could say, I need this done. And we could have a matching program with this class would really like to take this on. And it's feasible to do it in a semester. And I don't know if it's ever possible to get that kind of thing going, but really they had a need for like, we need some handouts to give people about these different ballot initiatives. Can you do this for us? You know, and that it was timely that election was going to come up, and it was, and the guy who was organizing that, who was fantastic, came to Rick's class a couple of times. The students did a presentation. He came to the presentation. Yeah, we went to the office too downtown and met with them sometimes, but very low budget.
There's so many needs like this. We had, I mean, we worked for the mayor's office, but then we had a consultant, which was an international NGO, which does menstrual equity work in LA. Pet Project Week, like they were sort of our expert consultants, so we had Zoom meetings with them, but then they were like, we have a need, right? Right. Like they're like, we need this kind of work too, and you were like, we can't do, right? But there's so many organizations that I think there could be a great matching
Maybe
system.
CTL could take on something like
too.
I mean, I haven't thought of a website where
social
people could list their, or some kind of online site where community organizations could say, we need this, anyone available to do it for us?
I'm writing it down. Corey, you had your hand up earlier.
It was a follow-up question about the amount of work, but it's sort of been answered in subsequent answers, so I think we should go to other folks.
Okay. I mean, we have like about 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to see if there was anything else that was coming up for people before I...
Can I just say one more thing that I think is really important? I taught this class called Feminisms in Community because Scripps needed someone to teach that class for the FGO, the Feminist Gender Sexuality Studies major. And I thought, I've done, you know, I'll step in and do that. It was a disaster. It wasn't a disaster, but there were things I didn't know. I hadn't had students actually doing projects that were semester-long projects for an organization. Well, I had with Crossroads, but I knew them better. But the woman who was starting up the organization had very ambitious ideas for the students. And some of them were just overburdened with work. And I had no idea. They only told me well into the semester what this person was expecting of them. And I felt like it would have been helpful to know what kinds of boundaries to set with organizations, and also to have students keep a journal so I could see what exactly they were doing. Some students were doing nothing, as it turned out. But those kinds of things, like monitoring how much work students have to do, is key, I think. And really, really articulating very clearly what the project is.
That's a great point, and I wonder if anybody else wants to talk about boundaries or having to say no, or because I think that, again, I think that like wanting to go and be in partnership and not knowing how this kind of work can then spin into a lot of hours that are being asked, and wanting to be able to meet those needs. I'm a people pleaser, and so I'm like, oh yeah, sure, but if anyone wants to talk about any situation that they've run into, I think that's a great.
Yeah, we had a similar experience with our course, and so I went to a model where whenever we work with a partner, we now set up an MOU in advance where we very clearly list, here's the expectations that the students, expectations for the students, what they're going to do, their responsibilities. Here's the liaisons' expectations and responsibilities, because We've done a number of different partnerships, and it's worked really well when we've had a really good liaison who's invested not only in the project, but in the students' education and mentorship, because it is taking some time from them out of their day to help work with the students. And just making that expectation clear up front has been really helpful. So we actually went to the point of like formally writing it down and having like an agreed upon MOU that we would sign. We didn't start that way. We started just very informally, hey, let's do this work together, but for exactly the types of situation that Sue was describing, being formal about it, and then scheduling check-ins. So I would meet with the liaison a couple times during the semester, meet with the teams of students a couple times during the semester, just get out the MOU document, like, are we meeting your expectations, and then, and have a conversation back and forth. But it definitely does take some oversight.
Absolutely.
I would say that it's like written into my syllabus in terms of when we would have like draft parts of certain of this done that we would send to the city, but we meet them every 2 weeks on a Zoom call, the entire class, it's not just me, for an hour, and the students like facilitate. I'm not the one who runs that meeting, right? They're the ones who have to run it and sort of present what they're doing. Any sort of, we talk about it, right, and how to do that ahead of time, but like any sort of hurdles that we've had, and like if we need to cut the project in certain ways, or the trade-offs we've had, what's their opinion on that, right? And we've had to narrow the scope of things, and sometimes I think organizations don't realize, right, how much work it actually, right? They don't realize, they're like, this would be great, right? And then you actually get into the work and you're like, this is, twice or 3 times as much work as you actually, thought it would be. And so you have to find the cuts. And most of them have been fine about it when you sort of explain that along the way. But it's again, when you're out of control, right? So it's like the lack of control where you think you're like, oh, I have a project that, no, the students could do through the course of the semester. And sometimes I don't even know that it's too big until we actually get into it. And then you realize, like, this is way more than we can do.
Yeah, Jason and I had that problem last year where we said we could analyze about 10 water samples from different places, and people started gathering water for us and I think we ended up, like, they would have given us 100 water samples, which was there was no way we could do it.
Because we didn't find water bottles outside of my office.
Yeah.
And tempering, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say tempering expectations a little bit. They had a lot that they wanted from, and helping them to understand that this is also in the context of a class, and we're teaching, and the students can only do so much at a particular pace because they're learning, and so that took multiple conversations, a lot of meetings, but eventually I think that kind of got through. The other part was they came with a political agenda, and which was valuable in a certain regard because the students got to see the way the way people want to use knowledge and information, scientific information in particular, in a particular way to say something that they already know they want to be able to say, and then we have to, our job, it was a great learning moment, our job in the classroom was to find what we think is true and accurate and to the best of our abilities and report it that way and not with the agenda. But it was a little tense.
Hard at the end because our final report was like, the water's fine for what we tested for, and I'm like, well, it couldn't be. They really wanted to find something, so
They wanted a particular outcome.
yeah.
I've had a different version of that in my class too, where I've had students who come in who don't agree with the values of the organization we're working for, right? And so it's like, how do you reconcile that, right? And so there's a lot of conversation around that in terms of, you can exit, you can voice it, right, in certain ways in terms of pushing back or asking questions of them, or you can sort of, kind of come to terms with it in some way, right? And so there's various students that do various things in that, but that's been another.
I would say, as just to add on to that, it's really interesting sometimes for very woke theoretical students to see what organizations that express their students' values, what they actually do in real life, how they compromise, what kinds of tools, policy, for example, that they use. I mean, it's an eye-opener for students to see how you make change on the ground. And very different from their, their abstract.
Yeah, which has been great learning for them. I think a lot of them have said, I'd like realized that policy is like messy and incremental and slow, and it doesn't go as far as it, right? But yet I'm working on something meaningful, right?
Right.
And it could be more local than I thought. I thought it was national, but now I can see that there's avenues more closer to home that I could work on.
the master's tool is sometimes useful.
I mean, that was the aspect that I think I didn't jump straight into the deep end about, because of course, in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, we could build a group research study and then we take it into Pilgrim Place and do all this stuff. And I was like, wait, okay. How about they figure out one thing that they can do based on their research in learning and memory to improve one thing in this elder's life, right? Like, I can't find my keys, right? Or whatever it is. And so I like really pared it down because I was like, this is the first time we're teaching this, and like, let's just see how it goes. And also that means that they're really gonna see that like change in one person's life, that is still really meaningful, right? And research can matter for an individual. But yeah, I like pared back my like, ooh, I can do so much with this, with like, okay, just one thing that they can do in one person's life. Like, let's see how that goes. And then maybe it can be kind of bigger as I teach it in the future. Yeah.
Any final questions or thoughts?
This has been a terrific panel, and I really got a lot out of this, so thank you very much. And all such different projects. It was really, really great.
I'm happy to share any of my not necessarily so great materials if anyone would like to see examples of project writing. I don't claim to have great examples. I'm sure some of the other people here have much better examples than I do. But.
Well, I'm hoping that, speaking of longitudinal things, that this can be an ongoing and a beginning of more intercollegiate collaboration when it comes to community-based teaching, because I know that there's so many people doing such great projects, and even to your point, Sue, about like having a central resource for community organizations, I feel like we all need a central resource to have these conversations and learn from one another. So there'll be a second panel with different panelists come on November 17th, and I'm hoping for the spring to have like a kind of, I don't know what it's going to be, but some sort of iteration, whether it's like, you know, a learning community or, you know, cohorts or something, so that we can all kind of continue to share tools and experience. So Tessa, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that would be really valuable, because one of the things that I heard in sort of thinking about career stage, right, is that like so much of this is connections that you have to community, and I have been here 3.5 years, and most of that's been pandemic, and so I had so many connections, you know, in the other places that I've lived where I've like, you know, come along my academic path, and so I like would love to be doing some of that stuff at a new level in a new way now that I have this faculty position, and I feel so lost. I still have a ton to learn on the community engagement side, but like I'm not in the community, right? And so having some of the shortcuts, not to relationship building, but just to some of the introductions would be amazing, because like we just uproot and go new places, and so you know, I don't necessarily want to wait 10 more years before I can like do that here, but like I don't necessarily feel like it's responsible for me to do some of that, because like I don't know, I don't have those connections here, and I totally have them elsewhere. And so thinking about bringing people in and sort of not fast tracking relationship building, that's not what I'm talking about, but like just some of the connections for folks who are new, I think would be amazing. And you know, Jason was new last year and like talking about that, so I would advocate for that.
Building on that,
please.
one of the things the Draper Center did the year I was the coordinator there, was to have kind of a mixer and invite community organizations who were interested in partnerships and faculty who were interested in developing community engagement projects. And they could just talk to each other. Have you been to one of those?
Yeah.
I don't know if they're still doing those.
Yeah, I haven't, my stuff hasn't been associated with Draper at all.
Right.
It's been sort of a weird,
Yeah.
but I think, you know, and then it's like, is it community, is it not? It's sort of that definitional of like you're doing something with, you know, LA, and it's not local, and it's research, and so it's. I think so too. I look at it as a community as well.
But the Community Engagement Center at Pitzer
Yeah.
can actually really help.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jason and I actually talked to them and said, here are some things that we're thinking or things that we could do. And they said, here are some partners that we've worked with in the past, and then they kind of do the matchmaking for you. And it's,
Yeah.
they've already vetted people that are going to be good to work with, hopefully. And
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I should totally do
So
that
I
again.
can
I
do
met with
those
another
people.
Tessa before the pandemic and then.
Yeah.
They did that for us the year before
Yeah.
at ABC as well.
Yeah.
I mean, also, it sounds like it has come through our own personal interests too,
Yeah.
right? Like organizations you were already part of, or like I started volunteering at the
Yeah.
Jocelyn Center and stuff like that. So it might also be another way is your own interests with relation to the community might be another avenue.
Yeah, totally.
I wonder if facilitating this, if like the CTL could serve as a sort of like super group or something, or like some sort of hub where maybe one of the events we could have like representatives from the various community engaged offices on the different campuses who can come and kind of talk about resources and that practical stuff, because I think that even though, each faculty can go to their respective, Scripps doesn't have one of those, for instance.
Yeah,
Scripps, what do you mean?
I know, we need to start one, but anyway, from what I'm hearing, it seems like the facilitation of connection building is something that's also valuable in not only kind of thinking about the act of teaching, like once you have it, but maybe a first step is to figure out like some of these more practical things too. So anyway, just things I'm thinking about as I'm hearing you all. But thank you once again.
Nice to have a repository of syllabi too. People
Oh,
can
yeah.
share them, right? In terms of like
Totally.
how you might construct a class, how you do,
Yeah.
Or scaffold a project.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Also readings, I mean, I have some short readings about community engagement,
Yeah.
solidarity, non-charity, and things like that.
Amazing. Well, we are even a little past time, so thank you once again to our See you at another CTL event. So maybe I don't know what the next one is. But thanks for. I don't know if it has CTL.